Hello and welcome to another Meet the Manager from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. In this series, we chat to a fantasy Premier League manager with an excellent track record. We find out the secrets to their success and also gather their tips for navigating through the current season. Today, I'm joined by Adam Hopcroft, who has been posting in the last 7 years on Fantasy Football Scout as Choppers13. Adam, welcome. How are you?
I'm very good, Joe. How are you?
Yes, I'm good and delighted to get you on. You're someone I've been following on Twitter as well for a while, and you. One of the reasons we've got you on, apart from your career history, is something we'll speak about a bit later, and that's stats. You like your stats. So, but first of all, let's have a look at your career history. It's up on the screen. So you finished in the top 10,000 in 5 of your previous 7 seasons, including 2 top 1,000 finishes. And in fact, your worst ever season is just 32k, and that was last time out. Currently, you are well within the top 50k, so on course for another strong finish, it seems. So let's have a look at this. So I understand a key aspect of your strategy is to link underlying stats with fixtures. So do you want to explain a bit about that and why it's proved so successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I talk you through some of the statistics that I look at, and I think anybody that follows me on Twitter will know that I post a lot and there's a lot of different things, and it's really all about putting them into context. So I suppose firstly, I look a lot at attacking players, and the key stats that I really look at there are shots in the box. I did some analysis earlier on. I definitely posted something on Twitter, but I think around about 95% of strikers' goals, and I'd include the likes of Salah and Sterling as sort of inverted forwards, if you like, come in the box. So I think shots in the box is absolutely critical. And I'd link that to big chances as well. I think players that are getting big chances consistently are likely to do well. And then obviously the positions, so penalty area touches, I think, are a key one as well. I'm not as bothered about shots and target, and the only reason for that is because I've watched a lot of games and you might see someone's hit the post, hit the bar. I think good finishers aim for corners as well. So if somebody, trying to bend it outside the post and put it in, etc. So I'm not as focused on shots on target. And then for the midfield players, and I think the typical ones that you would look at are like your Sigurdssons, De Bruynes, Erikssons, the sort of things that I would look at for those players are chances created. Big chances created, I think, are a great metric as well. Are they having shots? I'm not as bothered about the position of the shots, because if you looked at De Bruyne, Sigurdsson, they score a lot of their goals from outside or the edge of the area. So the position isn't as important.
So, just to go back, just to explain a bit more about that, some of the metrics you've used there, are you also combining how your experience of certain players as well? So, for example, you mentioned Sigurdsson. So over the last 7 seasons that it doesn't matter whether Sigurdsson's shooting in the box.
It's a great point. So I think, and I may get some of the stats wrong, so I haven't got every plan, but I think I checked, out of his last 17 goals, 9 have come outside the box. So therefore, which is a pretty good ratio for, it's probably close to 50% or more than 50% of his goals have come outside the box. And I think what I'll often do when looking at a player, I look at their form in comparison to other players, but also look at how they're doing against maybe their purple patches that they've had. So a couple of really good examples with this. So Harry Kane, and I posted something sort of, I suppose, midway through what's gone of this season. But I think it's quite clear, since that injury he had against Bournemouth, he doesn't seem to be the same sort of player. And you can see that from watching the games. So I was interested to see what impact that had maybe had on the statistics, etc. And then when I looked at it, rather than having the standard 5 shots a game, which the likes of him and Aguero will have, he's down to about 2.5, 3 a game. And I think other than maybe the Brighton game and the Cardiff game where he was playing quite deep, other than that this season, he's been way off in terms of the number of shots he's having. And I think that's why, for me, I just don't really consider him as a good option at the moment. I think Salah's a little bit different, because if you actually compare Salah from this time last season, we'll talk about expected goals in a minute, but his expected goals are more than 9 games in last season. His His shots are sort of on a similar level. He's only one goal worse off. And he's actually had some really difficult fixtures. So I think that's a case for me. I would say Kane's off form and he's not really getting the same quality of chances. Whereas I think Salah, on the other hand, there was possibly a confidence issue, but I'd expect him to really kick on from here.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned expected goals as well. Now, this is something that, I mean, I have my much trumpeted goals imminent table, which is sort of expected goals, but it's like kind of like the bargain basement jumble sale version of it. But yeah, what is it about expected goals that you like, and how do you use that to select players?
Yeah, so I think firstly, hats off to you. I think you're ahead of the curve with this because I think expected goal, if you look at the two of the things I said, big chances and shots in the box, players that do well in that will do well at expected goals. So expected goals effectively works out the percentage for each chance that a player who's of average ability would have of scoring. So the most extreme example, I think, is Højbjerg for Southampton when he put one in against your boys earlier in the season. Had a 1% chance of going in. So it's unfortunate for Brighton fans. But then a tap in from 2 yards where, so I think Aubameyang's last night would have had a really high expected goal rate. So I think the one thing that expected goals tells you is it tells you the quality of chances a player's getting. So I think that helps, because if a player's continually to getting opportunities from good positions and has a high expected goals, you can then assess, do you think that's going to continue or not? So I think that helps. I think you can also use it to look at over and under performance. So you'll tend to find that the top players will outperform their expected goals. So I haven't got a list up in front of me, but I think, if you looked at it over quite a long period of time, the likes, I think Salah has outperformed his expected goals for the last 4 or 5 seasons. And it's the same for a number of other top players. So I think as long as they get in the chances, you can have the confidence that, so Salah, where he's maybe only, he's been either missing chances or he's just put one in the net, at some point he's gonna take all of his chances in a game. And I think that's the thing that expected goals gives me that confidence. As long as they get in the chances, that the goal should follow. I think you just got to use it responsibly though, because there will be poor finishes in there, and it's just trying to work out whether you feel, and this is where possibly the eye test will come in, whether you feel they're going to start taking the chances at some point or not. Where I've used expected goals the best this season isn't actually related to players. I think it's probably more related to teams. So I wildcarded fairly early. I think it was game week 4. So there'd only been 3 game weeks. One of the reasons was to bring Hazard in. But also as well, I'd looked at the expected goals and I really wanted a set and forget goalkeeper, because I've been in that position where I've been rotating. I keep missing the points. Fabianski would have been the normal go-to, but his fixtures were not great. So I looked at it and Wolves had conceded 5 goals in 3 games. And, on the face of it, that's not very good. But when you look at the expected goals, they'd actually conceded, the expected goals against was 2.7. So it's average about 0.9 per game, but they played Man City. And Man City, if you go back and look at not just the expected goals, but the number of goals they're scoring, they're putting 3 and 4 past most teams. So I thought that was, they're actually 2.3 goals worse off than they should be. And I looked at the other games and I looked at the Leicester game, and I think their expected goals, and that was exceptionally low. It was, and it was a fortuitous strike at best from Maddison, and the own goal from Doherty, which was, let's face it, a bit of a fluke. And so I think there was clear. And then even in the first game, you had Richarlison's goal on the counter attack, which is a great finish. So I looked at it and I thought, well, actually, it's probably reasonable to expect, because I had good fixtures coming up, which we'll talk about in a minute, that they're actually going to, have quite a solid defence, and that's the way it's turned out. And I think there were certain games like the Burnley game at home where the expected goals against, I think Burnley had 1 shot the whole game, so it's really, really low. So that's worked out well. I think I did double up on Wolves' defence. I brought in Bennett, and I suppose the only regret is I didn't go for Doherty. But that was partly for team structure, and I think my pure focus really was getting that set and forget goalkeeper. So that's worked out quite nicely.
So that was looking at something. I mean, a lot of us would say went for Doherty because we thought we might get some attacking points, but in general, the Wolves' defence there, that shows why expected goals, rather than seeing they've conceded some goals, rather actual real life stats, if you see what I mean. So that helped you to make that decision and say, hang on a minute, I think Wolves are going to be a real good team here. Did you look at other things as well? Because there was another interesting stat about Wolves, wasn't there, about the amount of shots they were conceding in the box and out of the box as well.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and this links into expected goals, because the more shots they concede in the box, the higher their expected goals will be, and I think that's really good as well for save points. So you'd expect, although maybe it didn't quite happen the weekend, is that if the teams concede a lot of shots outside the box, that the goalkeeper should, on average, save the majority of them. So that's really good for save points as well. And so hopefully against the bigger teams here, rack up the save points. I think that's a good point. But I think for me, shots in the box really does link into expected goals, because as soon as you go in the box, the expected goal percentage goes up quite a bit.
Okay, I mean, how do you link that in with fixtures as well? So you've got those stats, you've got these underlying stats that you've accessed from places like Fantasy Football Scout, and you combine it a bit with your knowledge and your experience of players. Coutinho's not here anymore, but that type of player, De Bruyne, Sigurdsson, Coutinho, all of those good players, it doesn't matter whether they're in the box or not, because they can score out of the box.
Yeah.
But how do you then marry all of that up with looking at fixtures?
So I know it's been mentioned on pretty much all of the Meet the Managers using fixtures. I use fixtures a lot to determine the players that I'm bringing in. So the first thing that I do after every game week is I've got loads of stats tables set up, and I look at the last 2 game weeks, because the thing that I want to find is players that can score points in the future. So it's quite easy to see the players that are currently scoring points, but I tend to look for trends in the data over the last couple of game weeks to see if players are coming into form. So I look at all the things that I mentioned before: shots in the box, shots in general, expected goals, chances created. So I look at absolutely everything. And then what I look to combine it with is I always look at 6 to 8 fixtures. I think 4. I think a few games ago, Bournemouth had a really good block of 4, but then they were coming into difficult fixtures. And I just think you're putting yourself in a position where you're going to potentially have to make a transfer. So I always look at 6 to 8 game weeks. And what I also look at as well is my method works a lot better from I would say 10 game weeks in plus, because you've got more data to go off. But I also look at the teams that have got maybe, like, say, 4 of their next 6 at home. So the best fixtures for me, so I block it into 4. So you've got the best fixture is at home versus a non-top 6 team. Then I would say away against a non-top 6 team. And then you've got home versus top 6, away versus top 6. So that's how I look at fixtures. And then what I'll always try and do, and it works better later in the sort of mid to late in the season, is look at where did players return their points. I'll actually look at their particular stats. So a good example last season is I looked at Salah, and I used this a lot around captaincy, is that at home he was averaging almost 10 points a game against non-top 6 opposition. So he's an absolute banker for the captaincy in those. But he wasn't far off also in against top 6 teams at home, and it was actually his away form against the top 6, which was the poorest, and then his away form against the non-top 6 was actually worse than his home form versus the top 6, if that makes sense. So I think it's using trends like that to make decisions on captaincies and transfers, etc. But I use the season ticker. I look for, I think looking forwards, I know Leicester have got a good next 4 or 5 fixtures, but I'd probably be against bringing in their assets, because after that, they've then got a tough run of games. So I'd look for more longer term, so, at least 6 to 8 good fixtures.
So it'd be like the likes of, say, for example, I guess West Ham, Brighton, not necessarily because you need to marry them up with the other stats as well.
Of course,
But
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's but if you're looking for a team with 6 to 8 good fixtures coming up, it would be the likes of Brighton, West Ham, Newcastle if the other stats tallied up, which they probably don't.
Yeah, I think you're looking at fixtures, all of those teams, and then Cardiff, which are an interesting one, which I'll talk about a bit later. I think Brighton's quite interesting, so because there's a few good examples here. So they had, I think over, including the Newcastle game, they had 4 of their next 6 were away from home. And if you look at their stats away from home, from an attacking perspective, they're not great at all. So I saw a lot of people touting Glenn Murray, and that really put me off. If it was the other way round, so 4 at 6 at home, Murray's record is incredible. Again, it just at the Amex Stadium, it's just incredible, full stop. So if it was the other way around, I think Murray would be a good investment. That said, on the travels and just in general, against non-top 6 opposition, Brighton's defence is really good. And, the expected goals and the other stats back that up. So I think that's how I would use the fixtures to decide, do I want to invest in a defensive or an attacking asset?
Okay. You also mentioned looking at, we mentioned about your experience of seeing players as well. But there's also a way of looking at that, I guess, comparing how they perhaps performed last season. I understand that Lacazette is quite a good example of looking at those types of comparable stats.
There's a few. So I think I mentioned it earlier about comparing players against their purple patches that they had in previous seasons. So I know Lacazette is a good example because the shots in the box and the shots is never somebody that features highly. He's not going to be in the sort of Kane, Aguero, Salah bracket. But actually stats up until, I haven't included last night, but they were quite comparable to when he was doing well last year. And I think that's what I tend to look at rather than just comparing every player the same. I think I was looking at the same for someone like Hazard. The reason I think he's doing really well this year, I think a lot of it is down to Sarri. I did some analysis at the start of the year, and I think it's just having more touches. And it might sound a little bit far-fetched, but he's having a lot of I think he's having up to 50% more touches in the final third. A player of that quality is going to do damage, and I think it's just the change in style. He doesn't necessarily have as much shots as other people because he's the sort of player where, and maybe a bit like Lacazette, where they'll shoot when they think they can score, and he'll always look for the better option. So Hazard's decision making is probably up there with the best in the Premier League. So he'll pass when he needs. He'll pass when he needs to pass. He'll shoot. He won't just take shots for the sake of it. So I think it's just looking at and comparing to previous seasons when people did well. Not just, yes, I have the hot stats that I use and my favourite stats, but I don't always completely rely on those. I'll try and think a little bit out of the box. And I think you mentioned the eye test as well. I watch a lot of football, and a lot of the time I don't actually, whilst I look at the stats after games, you can see who's had the most shots, who's playing well, and you can see the stuff that stats don't show. So probably the big things will be when the ball goes across the box and someone's like a yard away from it. And there was a few times, I think, when Kane was in that situation last year, and that for me, it wouldn't register necessarily as a big chance or a shot because he's not touched it, or somebody's just marginally away from a through ball or a last-ditch tackle. So there's absolutely loads from watching games that you can get that you wouldn't see. And I think the only thing I would add in with that, and I think sort of the other factors I use with fixtures and stats, is, I suppose, a player's motivation. So I read a lot of the local press. So to see, because I think the local press, I think fans forums obviously use them with caution. I think what a player's saying, I think all of those things can give you a bit of a picture of the player's mindset as well, and what other people think of them, and not just looking at our fantasy football bubble. So I think that's also really useful to do as well.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the current season and see where you are now. So here's your current team, fresh from last night. We can add Bellerin's points now. That was a game of a game indeed for Bellerin owners, ups and downs there. But yeah, he was great, and Arsenal were great there. But
Yeah,
looking at your team there, obviously you can see why Arsenal were there, because they've had a good 6 to 8 game fixture run of fixtures there. But also another thing is something really similar to your team and so many others top managers that we have on this series, is that cheap bench there. You don't like to make bench decisions, and yeah, I mean, is that something? Is this just by chance you're like that, or is this a concerted thing that you do with your team structure? Do you
know what? No, it's not. It's not a deliberate thing. So I'm quite flexible, and I play each season differently, and it's possible that could change in the near future. And I'll possibly talk through some of the options. So the set and forget keeper, that is something I've done differently this year, and it's worked out quite well so far. So I'm pleased with that. I think the way the season started, it seemed like you needed to have 3 big defenders, and particularly when I wildcarded. So I wildcarded at a time Arsenal were coming into great fixtures, as you mentioned. So I wanted, and I've brought in Alonso for the wildcard. I think I had Mendy at the time, so I thought it was important, and that's why I took Robertson out and went with Bellerin. And so I think that was the reason, and I thought there was such value in the Wolves' defence. I fancied Bennett to keep on playing, which he has, and I'd read that's the sort of thing where I'd use forums for to see. And there were a lot of people talking about how well he's been playing, being Wolves' best defender. So I was confident he'd continue to play. And then I just thought Wan-Bissaka, such great value, and for $4 million, it frees up a lot of funds to do other stuff. And I think I had Hazard, Salah, and Aguero, so. It wasn't actually I'm going to have a cheap bench deliberately. I think the Billing situation was that, again, he's just someone who's playing. He's going to be my last sub, and he'll give me 2 points every week. And if I get down to my last sub, I'll take those 2 points. And I think he doesn't. You don't have a benching headache because you'd be last on the bench. But I'm pretty sure I've played Wan-Bissaka ahead of Bellerin in one of the game weeks.
Okay.
So
no, I was going to say, so what I'm quite interested in, I'm sure other people will as well, is all of the stuff we've already mentioned, and applying that to your current team now. So taking into account all those stats you look at, the 6 to 8 game weeks in advance, your knowledge of those players, your experience of them, and comparing them, and bringing all of those things together. From your current team, where are you looking to improve? Which players are you looking to bring in, and who's kind of on their way out for you?
Yeah, so I was looking at this, and I think the first thing is, all things being well, I'll probably look to hold a transfer this week, because the players that I'm looking to possibly get rid of, so I'd say Ryan Fraser. One of the reasons, and this isn't a definite that I'm going to get rid of him, because I think Bournemouth have looked okay on the counter-attack and they've got some good fixtures coming up. However, he hasn't had a shot in the last 2 game weeks, so that's concerning. So effectively, he's got 0 chance of scoring. He's been subbed in the last 2 game weeks. Stanislas has returned. He's only created 3 chances in the last 2 game weeks, so that's all gone down. So he's somebody, but he's got Fulham, so he's not leaving my team before Fulham. I would not advocate that. So he's potentially someone I'm looking at coming out. Players I've looked to come in and replace him, I'm thinking of potentially freeing up some money so I can invest elsewhere. Josh Murphy I'm a big fan of, and I've watched him, and I've been sort of praising him for the last 3 or 4 sort of 2 or 3 game weeks, and I think because of his fixtures, he's got, after the Liverpool games, he's got 4 of 6 at home, which is what we talked around, and in his last 2 home games he's had 11 shots, 6 in the box. He scored 2 goals. He's had 13 penalty area touches. So he hits the fixtures, hits the stats. He actually played really well against Spurs away. He possibly could have scored. I think he had 2 big chances in that game. He's 4.8 million. So I'd play him definitely in the home game. So he's a really, really good option. And actually the press, the Cardiff press have been very, spoke about him very complimentary. So he's somebody I'm looking at. I think that you could also look at Newcastle. So Ritchie and Kennedy. So Kennedy was in a similar bracket. I personally prefer Murphy, but he's had 10 shots and 4 in the box over the last couple of game weeks. Ritchie's quite interesting because he's had 9 shots and 8 in the box in the last 2 game weeks. And what's quite interesting about Ritchie, he's created 4 chances as well. He takes their corners. I think the only thing that counts against that is that I'm going to have to spend 1.1 million more.
It's a tricky price.
Yeah, and then I think other players that possibly may come out my team are Jimenez, possibly. I say it with caution. I think the last game he'd just come back from Mexico, so I don't think it's fair to judge him. Wolves are really under par, and I think so. And he's had 8 big chances this season and missed 7. So there's a big question mark. He's getting the chances. He's very much involved in a lot of Wolves attacking play. I think he's got 3 assists this season, but can he finish? And he's never really had. I admit he's probably not had a consistent spell of playing games for other teams, but he's never really been that prolific. So he's somebody that I may consider getting rid of. And the other one's Richarlison. I don't like him through the centre. He's had, I think prior to that, he was averaging about 3 shots a game. He's had 2 shots. I know he scored 1 of them in the last 2 games. And he just looks out of sorts. So I think that's combining everything. And the player that I would consider bringing in, we've mentioned earlier, Sigurdsson. I think he looks better at the moment. I think he's involved in everything. He's taken about half of Everton's corners and set pieces. He's had 9 shots in the last 2. He can score in out the box. Created 7 chances. So he's possibly someone I would look at there. The other area that I'm really considering, and I don't have it currently, is I need to invest in Man City's defence. So they've got 5 clean sheets in a row. Their expected goals against this season in 9 games is 4.31, and you've got someone like Laporte who's played every minute. The other option would be Mendy. So I'm just going to observe the Spurs game first, and then I'll probably do 2, maybe 3 transfers the week after. So that's where I'm looking to go. I think anybody that's not got Arnautovic, for me, is the player to bring in. Brilliant fixtures. I think he's looked really good. I think he was unlucky against Brighton not to score. I think he was unlucky against Spurs. I mean, he probably, on another day, I mean, there's a world-class save from Luiz. He would have scored. But he's also, what I like about Arnautovic is he brings other players into the play. So he'll get assists as well. Great fixtures. He's a typical talisman. And I think the other 2 people in my team that I've seen people talk about getting rid of, I think Aguero, people are saying he's only getting 6 points. If you watch the game and look at the stats from Saturday, if I'd have saw the stats and had to guess how many goals he'd scored, I'd have gone with, at least 2, possibly 3. So 4 big chances he had, which, on another day.
Yeah, that was an Aguero hat-trick game.
It was. He had
very painful to watch.
I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think that performance had the highest expected goals of any single player this season. So he should have got 1.81. And so I think for Aguero, I've actually been really impressed with him, how he's played overall. And do you know what? He's averaging, I think, a return around about 60, 65 minutes. If he's playing 65 minutes, I'd take that over Kane or pretty much any other striker at the moment. I think he's looking really good.
So you've got this core of Salah, Hazard, Aguero. They're going nowhere. Lots of people have been moving them in and out and those types of things. I've done it myself with Aguero out for Kane. It didn't work. And if I'd have been listening to you, for example, I probably wouldn't have made that move because, as you said, Aguero's stats are there. He's someone you're going to want to bring back in, I think. But what's interesting is these other players around the periphery, because a lot of people are going a bit mad on Leicester players and you're not so keen. I guess anyone watching the Arsenal game last night would probably see why. And then other things like everyone's gone at Richarlison mad this season, and it's really refreshing to say, no, hang on a minute, Sigurdsson's the one.
And I think if I've made mistakes in the past or I think I've picked the wrong player, I've got no problem changing it. And I think it's been a surprising season for me because 9-10 game weeks in, I haven't taken a hit. I usually take quite a few, so it's been a bit different. But I definitely, if I feel I've made a mistake, I'll try and correct it as soon as possible. Okay. The other thing I'd add, Joe, just from the videos that you've done before, there's been 2 instances. One where I can give a good example of where my strategy's worked, and one where it hasn't. Mm-hmm. So I think the best 2 examples I could think of, because I know you think you'd ask this pretty much in everyone, is that where it worked is like you just mentioned, the Kane example this season, is that I looked at it, looked at the stats. I think the other big factor is I had a free transfer, but I'd have had to take a 4-point hit further down, maybe the following week, to do the transfer that I actually wanted to do. And then I think every time you look at a 4-point hit, it's actually a goal, isn't it? You're losing a goal per week for a striker. So I think when he did all the maths of that, and then looking at the fixtures going forwards, it didn't make sense. And I thought I had to bring Arnautovic in just to stop me from making that move. And then because I definitely wouldn't have done it for a hit. And I think the season before, actually, I had a really good strategy where I was rotating the captains, and there was I think I bought Aguero in for a hit, and because I bought him in for a hit, I thought I have to captain him against Burnley away, and it was just such a poor decision because everything was telling me Aguero's stats weren't as good away from home. Salah, although he was playing Spurs, his actual points at home against the top teams were better than Aguero's away. So I think that's where I went against it, and I got punished for it. So I almost went, because I took a -4, I thought I'll just captain Aguero, and it, on paper might have looked an easier fixture. So I think sticking to your strategies is really important. I think it's so hard with the likes of Twitter, Fantasy Football Scout, to go with, you want to go with, it's easy to go with the majority and go with the crowd. And I think where I've stuck to my guns and made a decision, I don't believe in gut feelings. So I think you've got to have your own decision-making process. But when I've stuck to my decision-making process, in the majority of cases, it hasn't gone wrong.
Okay, no, I mean that's a common theme that's emerging whenever they the other managers have kind of gone away from their strategy and their tried and tested methods. It doesn't go on outside of your comfort zone. But it sounds like it's all going to plan this season. It clearly has over the rest of your career as well. But for now, Adam, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the game week and good luck with the rest of the season.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Joe.